the consequences of the interview were lethal. She would be alive today. She'd be 64 years old with 5 grandkids.
Who was Martin Bashir?
Princess Diana, Michael Jackson. Both their lives would have been longer and happier had Martin Bashir not become their pal. Bashir managed to get in with his fake bank statements, and then he finds himself in Kensington Palace talking to Diana. But these were out-and-out forgeries, simple as that. What Martin Bashir had decided to do was effectively terrify Diana out of her wits. He managed to persuade her that the person who was now the King of England had organised, if you like, a hit squad to have her murdered. Why would the King of England want to murder Diana? She was duped, she was fooled, she was hoaxed. She did it so that if she washed up in the Thames the next morning, then people would know. What happened next really does raise serious questions about Tim Davie. What did you know, and when did you know it? BBC has spent more than £1 million of licence fee money to stop this book being written.
I know it's annoying when creators ask you to subscribe, but since I started, the channel's grown 10 times faster. If you don't sub, YouTube probably won't show you the next episode. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Hit subscribe. Andy Webb, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Tell me a bit. So we're going to talk about this amazing new book you've got, Dianarama, and you were the person that exposed all of this, we will get into what this is. Martin Bashir, let's start with him. We're going to talk about Diana, we're going to talk about what happened to her and theories around that. But who was Martin Bashir for any maybe younger viewers?
Okay. Well, as somebody unkindly maybe said to me at some point, that before the Diana interview, Martin Bashir wasn't a household name in his own household. You know, he was at the bottom of the pile on the Panorama reporters roster. Panorama, again, forgive me, people who don't know, the most venerated current affairs show on the BBC. I think it's started in 1953, something like that. So it's very, very old. Excuse me, very venerated. Martin Bashir was a very, very junior reporter. So for him to get it's difficult to sort of put the interview with Princess Diana quite where it should be. It would be above Taylor Swift, above Kim Kardashian. It would be above it was the most sought-after bit of media property in the whole wide world. And chasing Diana at this time, 1995, the interview was done. Chasing her for years before that was Oprah Winfrey, a younger Oprah Winfrey, Barbara Walters, who was the doyenne of celebrity interviewers at the time, David Frost, you name it. Everybody, Oprah and Barbara Walters, they'd been to lunch at Kensington Palace, but had been politely brushed off. But then the world heard that Diana had sat down for an hour-long interview with somebody. And it was Martin Bashir, who? And that is kind of highly relevant because the world outside is asking who is Martin Bashir and how has Martin Bashir got this interview. It seems the people who didn't ask how Martin Bashir got his interview were actually his bosses. Nobody, what's an analogy? It would be the intern. The new intern, say, at the Sun newsroom, there's nothing wrong with the Sun, but let's say the intern at the Sun newsroom who comes and says, do you know what? I've got an interview with Princess Kate. She said to me, she's getting divorced and and I got this interview. Now, the Sun newsroom would get the intern, give him a shake, and they'd find out that, what he blackmailed her, he threatened her, he'd done whatever he'd done to her. The BBC, when they heard that the unheard Martin Bashir had got this incredible scoop with the world's most sought-after person, I'm still not entirely sure to this day whether there were suspicions, but the story is that there were no suspicions. The view was, oh my God, lovely things do happen to one, don't they, occasionally, and this is November, and I suspect the feeling was, I wonder what else Santa will bring us this year,
So this was then, because I remember as a kid, Martin Bashir, I remember from the Michael Jackson documentary, so I presume this was well before that.
It was indeed. I think that was 2003, something like that.
So that came as a consequence probably of the fame he got from Diana.
Certainly the meeting, he got in to meet Jacko as a result of his profile that he'd... I mean, interesting point. The two most famous people in the world in their day, Princess Diana, Michael Jackson, as I say in the book, both their lives would have been longer and happier had Martin Bashir not become their pal.
Wow.
It's as simple as that. I mean, in the case of Jackson, of course, Michael Jackson, the jury is still very much out on his private life. But the fact is that Martin Bashir was able to get into his confidence, and then he turned on him. And I think that was 2003. By 2009, Michael Jackson's dead, drug-induced death, etc., etc.
It's interesting because Louis Theroux did a thing about Michael Jackson at the same time. And I remember watching, it was one of the strangest Louis Theroux episodes he's ever done, because it's about Michael Jackson and he doesn't have the access to Michael Jackson. So he's going around saying we were supposed to get it, but Martin Bashir got it. He says this in the voiceover. So I don't know what happened there necessarily. That meant that he was going to get Jacko and then Martin Bashir did. And Jackson didn't come out well from the Bashir documentary.
He didn't come out at all well, and I think what it tells you is Martin Bashir's incredible ability, and you've got to call it a skill. It's the sort of skill that a paparazzi on a speeding motorbike who can get crystal clear pictures with one hand while travelling at 80 miles an hour on a moped. That's a skill. That's a skill. To get the picture from half a mile away of the celeb on around the swimming pool, and that's a skill as well. Not an admirable skill, but a skill. And Martin Bashir's enormous, incredible skill was to get into the confidence of these people. In the case of Diana, it was a two-stage process. First, he had to get past her brother, Charles Spencer, who's worked with me really very, very closely in the writing of this book. He had to get past Charles Spencer. And Charles Spencer, of course, was a journalist. He'd actually been a journalist longer than Bashir had been a journalist. So Charles Spencer, a bright guy, not a stupid guy at all. Bashir had to get past him, and he did that by, some of this may be familiar, some of this story is already has been in the public domain, of course, but to get past Charles Spencer, to get into Diana's inner sanctum in Kensington Palace, Bashir went and got a couple of documents forged, very, very sophisticated forgeries, which purported to be bank statements. Again, I could explain why and who and what they showed, etc., and that would take maybe too much time. Anyway, Bashir got his bank statements forged, got a meeting with Charles Spencer. The point of these bank statements was to prove really how good his, i.e. Martin Bashir's, sources were. The point was, look, if I can get hold of this sort of documentation, that really shows I've got my finger on the pulse, I'm on the inside here. And these bank statements were purporting to show that an employee or an ex-employee of Charles Spencer had been taking bungs from the tabloid press to leak stories. But these were out-and-out forgeries, just simple as that. But to a degree, and the story in the book is more longer than this and more complicated than this, but essentially these bank statements worked in as much as, not much time had passed before Charles Spencer picks up the phone to Diana and says, look, sis, there's a guy here from the BBC, who's got, documentation that looks as if it's genuine, and you've got to see him. And she did see him. So Bashir has penetrated the sort of the bristling hostility that Charles Spencer understandably had to the media, because at that point, again, it's sort of like another world. But 30 years ago, That, when the tabloid press were really kind of running rampant around the Diana and the royal family, even much more so than they do today. Charles Spencer would rebuff. He wanted nothing to do with the tabloid press. At the time, he was actually involved in a long libel case against the Daily Express at the time. So he wasn't an easy touch by any means. But Bashir managed to get in with his fake bank statements, and then he finds himself in Kensington Palace talking to Diana, and it's what happened there that I describe. It's really, for the first time, it has been described exactly what he did to get her to sit in front of the BBC's cameras to record the interview that went out, 54 minutes of the most extraordinary stuff. Really, really quite extraordinary. Anyway, sorry, I'm trying to...
I'm fascinated.
Yeah.
I'm hanging on every word here. Absolutely fascinated.
The answer is, I don't want to get too long, but the interview that went out almost exactly 30 years ago, it went out on November the 20th, 1995. And it remains to this day, and probably always will be, the most momentous bit of television that the BBC has ever broadcast. But it's vital to not even think of it as an interview. It's not an interview. It's a performance. It's a double act. It was a performance devised between Martin Bashir and Princess Diana, the two of them. And I don't want it for a moment to sound like I'm sort of blaming the late princess in any way here. She was duped, she was fooled, she was hoaxed. She was duped, she was fooled, she was hoaxed. Really clever in doing what Bashir had insisted she should do in giving this interview. But
clever, why? Clever because it's preventing the other story about the bungs that Charles is...
Well, yes, but it actually gets way, way wackier than that. And I'll explain it, and you can you can take the full version or shorten it or whatever. It is so bizarre, so bizarre, that I, having spent years and years working on this, studying, I still find it totally, totally bizarre. Bizarre because what Martin Bashir had decided to do was effectively terrify Diana out of her wits, frighten her out of her wits. How did he do that? Well, how he did that was this. He managed to persuade her. This is why the story is so utterly bizarre. He managed to persuade her that the person who was now the King of England had organised, if you like, a hit squad to have her murdered.
Wow.
So King of England hires hit squad, is hiring hit squad to have Diana murdered. That's wacky. Not only Diana murdered, but the lady who is now the Queen of England, Camilla Parker Bowles, she was going to be murdered as well. Why would the King of England want to murder Diana, who was then still his wife, and Camilla Parker Bowles, who had been his girlfriend? Why would the king want to murder these two people? The answer is, and this is Martin Bashir's fiction, just the fiction that he created, and Diana, bizarrely, was made to believe. Because Charles wanted, in fact, to marry their nanny, who is the lady who, your audience of a certain age will remember the name like anything, Tiggy Legg Burke. Tiggy Legg Burke. Her name now, her married name is Alexandra Pettifer. Tiggy Legg Burke was 30 years old. She was the person who had been hired as the nanny to look after Harry and William on the weekend basis. When Diana doesn't have them, Charles has them. She's the nanny who looks after them. Bashir had been able to persuade Diana that it went much, much further than a nanny relationship. He actually managed to persuade Diana that Charles wanted to marry Tiggy, and actually there had been a terrible thing had happened, that Tiggy had actually got pregnant and had had an abortion. And this abortion had been paid for by Charles. So, as I say, that is the utterly bizarre nature of the story. King of England, murder squad, to murder his wife, to murder Camilla, who's the queen, you would say to yourself, can anybody believe that? I mean, if you sort of came up with that as a Hollywood script writer, they'd say, no, go and take another, do another line. This ain't, this isn't, this isn't going to work. That was the story that Bashir had cooked up, and managed to persuade Diana that this was the truth.
Diana didn't ask for evidence, or?
Good question. Diana was shown what Bashir would claim was evidence. We know that after the bank statements we've already talked about, the initial 2 bank statements that get his foot in the door vis-a-vis Charles Spencer, Bashir then created another couple of forgeries, another couple of bank statements, which purported to show that Diana's private secretary, Patrick Jeffson, who again has worked with me very closely on the book, forgeries that showed that Patrick, Diana's private secretary, was on the take from what he called dark forces, MI6, MI5, GCHQ, who knows, but some spooky people to spy on Diana. So we do know that Bashir was absolutely capable of producing forgeries as and when he needed them. And I recount in the book, this is one of only 2 points in the book where I say I'm going to have to tell you this off the record, and you'll know what that means. It just means that the person who's given you the information cannot be identified for very good reasons. I was told that vis-a-vis the so-called abortion that I've talked about, Tiggy Legbert, the nanny, had an abortion paid for by Prince Charles, that's the story, that Bashir actually forged another document, which was the receipt, if you like, from the clinic that had carried out the abortion, paid for by Prince Charles. So you say, did Princess Diana, did she not look for evidence? Well, she was presented with evidence. And you've got to say to yourself, the word has often been applied to Diana, that she was paranoid. And I think that is really, really unfair, because the situation is this. If Bashir was this reporter for Panorama, gold-rimmed glasses, he's got a suit, all the rest. This is the British Broadcasting Corporation. If David Attenborough came up to me and whispered, I'm afraid I've got to tell you, your wife is planning to have you murdered, and I've got some documents here to prove it. Well, you'd be a bit silly not to take that seriously.
Yeah.
Also, remember where Diana is at this particular point in her life. She knows, without question, that her phone has been well and truly tapped, and the resulting conversation broadcast to the world. It's what, back in the day, people will be familiar with the name Squidgygate. It was called Squidgygate because her the chap she was talking to at the time, the pet name that he used for her was Squidgy. And this was printed in the Sun, etc. So Diana knows that
there was Charles stuff as well, wasn't there? The Charles, was it like a period thing that he said stuff like, I want to be in your...
Well, that was exactly. Well, that was a wholly separate tape, but this was a conversation between Charles and Camilla, and the what did he say? I'm so unfortunate. I'm like a tampon that won't flush away.
Oh, that was with Camilla, was, of course, that makes sense. Yes.
But yes, I mean, those 2 recorded and leaked phone calls happened within literally a space of just a few months in 1992. So Diana sort of knew that spooky things were happening vis-a-vis her phone. She also, at that particular point in her life, was somewhat again, I'm only hesitating because these stories, I think they're utterly fascinating, but they need to be explained what happened and when. Diana had a brief relationship with one of her bodyguards, a chap called Sergeant Barry Manakee. The exact nature of the relationship, it would be kind of unfair to fully speculate, but they became much too close, and he was moved into another job. Now, only a few months later, he was killed in a road accident on a motorbike, but he was killed. And Diana, we know there is evidence that she was very uncomfortable that he may have been not just killed but murdered. Now, that there is not the least scrap of evidence that was the case. Mm-hmm. But Diana was saying to herself, well, okay. She was genuinely worried that might have happened. So, as I say, when somebody from the BBC comes along with documents to prove it and tells you this sort of stuff, you say to yourself, you've got to fill in the sort of little bit of scenario here. All right, so Diana's head has been filled with this extraordinary stuff. Her life's in danger. Her husband wants to marry the nanny. There's been abortions, etc., etc. Why does she then? How is that going to help Martin Bashir get his Panorama interview? Well, the reason is this: that Diana had been made to believe, to think, brought to believe that what she should do is go on television, not reveal all these incredible secrets that had been divulged, keep all them under your hat, but just go on television and make it absolutely clear to Buckingham Palace, the audience, no, but to Buckingham Palace, and in Diana's words, I am not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. Yeah.
Was there an element of I'm not taking my own life in case this happens to me? Like, I'm happy, I'm fine. If something happens to me, someone's done it to me. I wouldn't take my own life, kind of thing.
Well, I mean, directly to that point, Patrick Jeffson, as I say, her private secretary, 7 days before the Panorama interview was recorded, he was present at an extraordinary meeting. Diana, Patrick Jeffson was there, two female lawyers were there, but Diana's principal lawyer, a chap called Lord Mishcon. And Patrick has described it to me. What Diana was doing was effectively setting down her last will and testament. Literally in case these murder plots and things. He said to me, she did it so that if she washed up in the Thames the next morning, then people would know exactly what had happened. So Diana put on record to her lawyer, Lord Mishcon, he noted it. I've got the actual, copy of the actual note that he made. Diana said she'd been told that the Queen, i.e. the late Queen Elizabeth, the long-time Queen, was going to abdicate in 6 months' time, which would have been April of 1996. So Diana says, right, I've been told the Queen is going to abdicate. I've been told that my husband is planning to have me and Camilla murdered. I've been told that the nanny has had an abortion, and I'm going to get what Diana described as a certificate to prove that, and I think that makes a reference to this letter that Bashir then produced. And all of these things were noted down. So Diana was, in effect, doing, as you just sort of suggested, she was worried about, very, very worried about her own safety. She wanted this all to be put down on paper. 7 days later, she goes in front of the BBC camera to do the interview that many people have seen, the Panorama interview. What she doesn't say in that interview, the stories she doesn't tell in that interview, are any of these extraordinary stories that she's just insisted that her lawyer puts on paper. What she says in the Panorama interview is really two things of principal importance. The first one is a clear message to Buckingham Palace that, look, as I say, I ain't going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. And the second thing, when Bashir asks her, do you think your husband, as he was then Prince Charles, do you think he should be king? And Diana's answer is effectively, no, I don't think he's suited. I don't think it would suit him, that job. Bashir then says, would you like the crown to go to William instead? And she says, yeah, I think that's what should happen. So you've got a scenario there that has been painted out, has been set out for her by Martin Bashir, that the Queen will be abdicating in 6 months' time, 6 months after the date of this recording the interview. Diana has said she thinks that Prince Charles shouldn't take the throne, but William should be given the throne. He's only 13 years of age at that time, so there'd be some sort of regent, etc., etc. But if you think to yourself, what position does Diana then occupy in that scenario? Well, it's a very, very powerful one, because she is the mother of the king, the teenage king. Diana is the mother. So for her, at this point in her own personal life, things are not looking too good, because she's formally separated already from Prince Charles, and who knows what will happen. In the scenario that Bashir has painted for her, she's in really quite a good place. Mm-hmm. Charles is off the scene. He's gone off to Highgrove, and he's doing his organic farming or whatever he wants to do at Highgrove. The crown has actually gone to William, and as I say, his mum is very much there, back in the centre of the frame. Mm-hmm. So that is the scenario that Bashir had painted for Diana, and it seems so bizarre, but is the one that she pursued.
So he not only fraudulently obtained the interview, he also, that very fraud got her to come out with an interview, or her answers that were as sensationalist as they could possibly be, really, for his interview.
Yes. I think he will have explained to her that, again, all of this sounds so sort of 30 years ago, as indeed it was, but at the time, enormous speculation about relationships that Diana had or hadn't she had with James Hewitt, who was at the time he'd been her riding instructor, and yes, she had a relationship with him. There was a chap called Oliver Hoare, who was an art dealer. Yes, there had been some sort of relationship with him. So I think it was sort of made clear that, look, you need to get that out of the way, so I'm going to put questions to you on that, and she answered those. But the point of the Panorama interview was not for Diana to do some sort of clearing of the clearing the stables, etc., for some unexplained reason. It was to make it very, very clear to Buckingham Palace that she was, as it were, not going to be. She was absolutely not a pushover, absolutely not a pushover. And the key things were these things that she said at the end of her interview as to how the crown should exactly go in the next few months.
Were there whisperings at the time at all about how as you say, how the hell did Bashir get this interview?
Yes, there were. I mean, a few of the tabloids had got a bit of a whisper. It's not entirely clear where from. Maybe, I suppose these are the kind of questions you could ask without really needing much of a whisper. It was sort of, had Bashir been made references to, sort of dark forces and, had that preyed upon Diana's mind. That's the sort of stuff that I think, if you're a tabloid reporter, you could sort of write that story without really needing much of a source. Because, as I say, Diana we all knew that her phone had well and truly been tapped, certainly on one very, very public occasion. We know that she had had concerns about whether the official protection around her, whether there was simply too much of it, whether she was under too much sort of scrutiny, uncomfortable scrutiny. But then again, yes, she was under effectively surveillance, but remember that at that particular point in history, the IRA is still busily running around London. So on occasions when Diana is, schlepping Prince William and Harry around in her car, you almost think it's unthinkable that at some point there wouldn't be benign surveillance of her, So, I mean, just getting back to your question, were doubts raised? Yes, they were. But of course, the most important doubt of all came from the graphic artist who had made for Bashir these original forged bank statement documents, a chap called Matt Wiesler, who again I've worked with very, very closely. Now, Matt produced these forged documents for Bashir really very, very innocently. They'd worked on Panorama films before. when you're making a Panorama film, you're kind of you're one of the good guys, and you're battling sometimes in some investigative films, you're battling the bad guys. Mm-hmm. And when you're doing that, sometimes corners not exactly get cut, but they almost get sort of swerved around a little bit. So when Matt was asked to produce 2 documents that appeared not to be entirely as they should be, Matt's assumption was, well, it sounds a little bit odd, but Martin, with the BBC, what he's doing is going to be fully above board. When Matt saw the Diana interview go out, Matt described to me he was sitting in his flat in Camden. He was watching it on a 20-inch TV screen with his then girlfriend. They were curled up on the sofa. He's watching this incredible interview go out. And a sort of a chill went down his spine, because he had been just as puzzled as anybody else about how Martin had got this interview. And Matt suddenly put 2 and 2 together, that the interview was in November. He'd made the forgeries, the fake statements, back in August. And Matt suddenly thought to himself, oh my God, those crazy documents I made have resulted in this.
Wow.
Now, Matt then, again, it's a detailed story, but to cut it to its basics, Matt went to managers at the BBC and said, look, I'm just going to put my concerns to you here that, back in August, I was asked to make these documents, and I'm just saying to you, in case you didn't know, that this is what had happened. And he was entirely rebuffed by the BBC managers. No, nothing. Don't worry about that. That sort of particular snowball gathered momentum, and Matt faxed a copy of the fakes that he had retained. The originals he'd sent off actually on a BBC motorcycle courier. Bashir had asked them to be delivered by motorcycle courier, but Matt had kept another couple of copies that with slight imperfections on them. He faxed these to a BBC producer who he knew, and from that point the story then kind of mushroomed. And I ought to be able to sum this up much more adroitly than I can. It's just to not miss vital points. It's difficult to know at what point to.
And how then? I mean, years later, I believe. How did you come to expose this?
Well, let me pay due credit. If you like, the story has almost been exposed twice, which is kind of rather bizarre. In 1996, the Mail on Sunday got really pretty close to exposing the full story, really pretty close indeed. Again, the long story would take much too long to tell. But the Mail on Sunday were able to... They were dealing with Matt Wiesler, the graphic artist who unknowingly produced these forgeries. They were speaking with Matt. They then went to the BBC and said, look, we've heard about forged documents. We've heard that your reporter has had forgeries made, and it's something to do with the Princess Diana interview, etc., etc. So they only had, what can we say, maybe 30 to 40% of the whole story. But what they had was pretty sensational. I mean, why does BBC Panorama, why had one of their reporters commissioned forged documents in the first place? I mean, that's pretty sensational. Without the murder plots by the king, and we didn't know that, but they knew this much. The thing is, the BBC, when asked for a statement and comment by the Mail on Sunday, they effectively, it's got to be said, they just lied. The BBC just lied to them.
Wow.
So what do you do? What do you do? If the BBC decide that is going to be their response to the story, it's really difficult to know what to do. When I say the BBC lied, what they did was this. They said, oh, no. These aren't forgeries. What they are is we're going to call them mock-ups, graphic mock-ups, right? The implication being that they were a sort of graphic device for a television program at some point in the future. They said, no. It's graphic mock-ups which were never broadcast. So it was, I see. So these are things that were sort of created for a television program, and for some reason they weren't required for that television program. Now, for the BBC to describe them as mock-ups would be like me, is a forged £20 note, if I go into the off licence and try and buy a bottle of gin, is that a mock-up £20 note, or is it a forged £20 note?
This is interesting, because they're really lying now. I mean, the first thing was to cover their own backs a little bit when this wasn't us, but to come out and say no, these are specifically used for. They're acknowledging they exist. That's actively lying now.
Yes, I think it is. I mean, what it most certainly is not, actively, very, very willingly, very enthusiastically not telling the truth. Mm-hmm. And it's where that enthusiastic not telling of the truth becomes a lie. They meet pretty soon, those two sorts of things.
Who was the head at this point at the BBC? Who was responsible for this?
Well, the head at the time, the Director General, who was also importantly the Editor-in-Chief, taking all editorial responsibility, is a chap called John Burt, who's still very much with us. He's in the House of Lords, Lord Burt. So he is he is, if you like, and always really has to be regarded as, the captain of the Titanic when this particular ship went down. I make the point in the book that I believe there are strong arguments for saying he wasn't only captain of the Titanic, he actually helped to fashion the iceberg as well, because it was the BBC had been configured in a particular way, its current affairs department, its news department configured in a particular way under John Burt, under which this sort of behaviour thrived. But you said who was in charge. Well, that's who was in charge. With direct responsibility for so-called investigation of what had happened was a chap called Tony Hall, who is also in the House of Lords as we speak. He later went on to become Director General of the BBC. So he was very much in direct charge of the inquiry, the events at the time. And it would have been him who absolutely signed off on this press statement to the Mail on Sunday, which, as I say, enthusiastically didn't convey what had happened. The other very, very important thing which the Mail on Sunday were not told was this. If you think to yourself, it's one thing to commission forged documents, but then the question is, well, what do you do? Like I say, I can commission a forged £20 note, but if it stays in my pocket, if I don't go down to the off licence, well, whatever, no big deal. So the question is, these forgeries that Martin Bashir had they been shown to anybody? Because that's the key thing. They become active forgeries when somebody has shown them. Yeah. Now, the BBC did not reveal at the time that, yes, indeed, they had been shown to Charles Spencer. Yeah. And they knew that. They knew that Bashir had taken his forgeries and shown them to Charles Spencer, pretending that they were genuine. So the BBC didn't say that either. And so the Mail on Sunday, yes, they published a front page splash, I think a couple of pages inside. I think it read something like, it was one of these headlines with a question mark after it, as I remember, which you always know that they're sort of almost there, but not quite. It was sort of like Mystery of Diana Mann's Fake Bank Statements or something like that. So they were very, very, very close to blowing the whole thing wide open, but not close enough. And the real tragedy here, the real tragedy is this, that although we can talk endlessly about whether the BBC, what they did in the story, they nearly didn't get it, it really matters because the one person who wasn't told about all these shenanigans, of course, was Princess Diana. It was not explained to Charles Spencer that he had been shown BBC forgeries. It wasn't explained to him. But Princess Diana was also kept in the dark, that this person who she trusted, Martin Bashir, she wasn't told that he'd also been going around brandishing forged documents and indeed lying to his bosses at the BBC as well. And why I say that it's tragic is this, that after the Panorama interview went out, Diana's life very much kind of went off course. I describe it, the word I sort of chosen is sort of became sort of untethered. She got rid of, parted company with her trusted advisors, in particular her private secretary, Patrick Jeffson. He was gone. She thought she couldn't trust him anymore. He's gone. Her long-time chauffeur, Bashir, had also said that he's in the pay of the dark forces. He's gone as well.
Wow.
A month after the Panorama interview goes out, Diana gets a letter from the Queen, the late Queen, saying, you've got to get divorced. That was a month after the Panorama interview went out. Now, the time span between the Panorama interview and Diana's death in Paris, in the Mercedes, in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, it's a little under 18 months. That's the time that she had. And in the book, I put these questions to her brother Charles Spence. I put the question to Patrick Jeffson. How direct, what sort of a line can you draw from Panorama to Paris? Like, what's the connection there? And both of them said to me that, tragically, regretfully, etc., that is a very, very definite line that you can draw. I mean, in Charles Spencer's, to sum up what he said, the consequences of the interview were lethal. Without that interview, Diana's life would not have followed the course it followed. Of course, the BBC Director General wasn't driving the Mercedes into the tunnel. Yeah. But had the BBC told Diana what they knew about the awful, even a little about the dreadful way that this interview had been obtained, her eyes would have been opened. She would have known that the person that she trusted was not to be trusted, and therefore the other things that he told her were not to be believed.
Sacking her driver, sacking other people.
All of those sorts of things. She finds herself, when you get to Paris, in the sort of ramshackle security operation run by Mohammed Arfai. His driver's drunk and he's taking drugs and he's doing whatever he's doing. There was no way that Diana would have been in that situation. And that is what is so heartbreaking today, in particular for Prince William. Because he can say to himself quite legitimately, if my mother had been briefed at the time that she could have been and should have been briefed about what had happened, there's every prospect that she would be alive today. She'd be 64 years old with 5 grandkids. If the BBC had done what I firmly believe they should have done when they had that information.
How did you come to expose that second piece, or come to find that second, like the pieces, and put it together?
Well, so I've sort of described how the story almost was brought to public attention in 1996. Fast forward 25 years. I'm making a documentary for Channel 4 on the, let's say at that point, they're rumours, they're sort of half-understood stories about what Martin Bashir may or may not have done. If you like, there's a sort of bad smell over this whole episode, this whole, the interview, etc. And I'm making a documentary about this. Again, I want to keep this, short within our bounds. People can read the book to tell you the full story. But I had put in various freedom of information requests to the BBC for information over this. I had been literally lied to during the course of some of these applications, but nonetheless, I'd put them in. Now, 48 hours before my documentary was to air, 48 hours before it was to air, the BBC, I received an email from the BBC saying, Mr. Webb, we're just so you know, we're sending you some freedom of information documents. And I'm thinking, hang on, I had literally at that point been asking for these documents for 13 years, if you like. 13 years was the date of my first request, and hadn't gone, 48 hours before the film goes out, they said, we're sending you some FOI documents. Okay, wow. Why? But anyway, sure enough, a bundle of documents arrived. There were 67 documents in all. Now, one of these documents, just one of them, was actually page 43. And it was a report that had been compiled by Tony Hall, if you remember that name. He was the chap who was in charge of the so-called inquiry back in 1996, later went on to be Director General. This was notes that he had compiled back in 1996, which he presented to a meeting of the BBC Board of Governors. Now, why this particular document, page 43, why it was so critical was that Hall had alleged to the BBC governors that in the matter of these fake bank statements, it wasn't Martin Bashir who had shown them to Charles Spencer. On the contrary, Hall had told the BBC governors, Charles Spencer had shown Martin Bashir some bank statements, which made utterly no sense at all, and certainly didn't accord with the story as I understood it at that point. What did I do with this? There's only 48 hours to go before my film is going to go on air. And as you will know from your own production background, it's like, that's not a lot of time to remake a film. What are you going to do? The film's going to be pulled. What's going to happen? What I did do, and at this point, it's important to say, I had no dealings whatsoever with Charles Spencer. I'd made a formal request for him to be interviewed in my documentary, and he politely turned me down, just as he turned down the hundreds of other people who sought interviews with him. So no relationship whatsoever with Charles Spencer. But I emailed this document to him, to his secretary as it was, but I emailed it to Charles Spencer. And lo and behold, very, very soon after, the phone rang. And it was him. Because when he saw what the BBC had alleged happened 25 years, he was, he later, said he was outraged. He was absolutely outraged that the BBC were touting this version of events, that it was he who somehow had shown Martin Bashir. It just didn't make sense. And he was absolutely outraged. And at that point, Charles Spencer unfolded to me something that, I was the first person to hear this story, I'm absolutely certain, in 25 years. Charles Spencer unfolded this extraordinary account of how he and Bashir and Diana had met back in 1995 at an apartment in Knightsbridge, and Bashir had unfolded a whole set of extraordinary stories and allegations, somewhat similar to the stories that he then went on to tell Diana about the murder plots, the king and the abortions and all this sort of stuff. And Charles Spencer came out with all of this stuff that he had kept to himself for good and understandable reasons, but had kept to himself all this time. So at that point, I'm in like a really very weird situation here, because my film is about to go out in 48 hours' time, and I've just been handed the most extraordinary
exclusive.
But how do you turn that, like sort of 4 pages of notes in my notebook, into a television program in 48 hours? I tell in the book, it's like, it would be like stopping the bride, in the church porch and saying, do you know what, I think when we change the dress, that isn't how it happens. When the documentary's there and all the technical stuff, it's got to go. The film did go out. It could go out because there was nothing in it that was not true. It's just that if horrible, criminality in it, it amounted to sort of 10%. There was another 90% that was just in my notebook. What then happened was really quite bizarre. I thought, well, what do I do with this stuff? I compiled a 2.5 pages of A4 memo, which is in the book, and actually sent it to the BBC. I said, look, this is what I've been told. This is what I've been told, that there was a meeting, on the 19th of September, 1995, began at 4 p.m. in Knightsbridge, and this is what was said, and this is what was said, this is what was said. Extraordinary stuff. Sent it to the BBC.
Where do you send it? info@thebbbc.co.uk?
No, we were then in direct communication with their head of communications for the news division. So there was literally an email, got through absolutely immediately.
Person, yeah.
Absolutely. And in fact, I know that it did that because I was then able to get emails through Freedom of Information which actually reveal how my email to the BBC actually popped up on this woman's, in her inbox, whilst my documentary was on air. So, literally she and the head of news and the chief lawyer of the BBC and the chief of staff to the director general, they're literally all sitting in their nice, comfortable living rooms, all watching the documentary. My email then pops up in her inbox and she circulates it, et cetera, which is quite amusing to see how that actually happened. But interestingly, the BBC's response wasn't, oh my God, right, we're going to get across this. The BBC's response was, we don't think we're not going to take any action on something, as they said, that happened 25 years ago. Okay, that was me. That's just me, the journalist, who said, look, this is crazy, crazy stuff. Yeah, they get lost.
How very BBC. We're not going to take any action.
Now, what was happening at exactly the same time, unbeknownst to me, is this. Once Charles Spencer had unfolded this extraordinary story to me, and then my documentary goes out, and there's not a word of it in my documentary, I think he was wondering to himself, he's thinking, well, okay, all right, what shall I do? I'm now Charles Spencer. What shall I do? What he did was effectively exactly the same thing that I'd done. He compiled the detailed memo and sent it to I didn't know this until later, but he sent it to the BBC as well, saying, look, this has got to come out now, all this stuff happened. What happened next really does raise serious questions about the guy who's running the BBC today, Tim Davie. People will have heard the name with regard to recent controversies about doctoring Donald Trump interview clips, etc., etc. Right. But with regard to this, it is very, very specific, the question he has to answer. And Charles Spencer wrote to him and said, look, again, to summarise it, but sort of the things that I just described. These terrible things happened, and I've got documentation to prove it all. And this is a private email. This is confidential stuff. Charles Spencer isn't sort of going off on one here. Yeah. He's sending a polite private email to the Director General of the BBC. And Davie replied to this effect: your story, Charles Spencer, your story does not accord with the story told us by Martin Bashir. Therefore, that's it. Now, at that point, Davie, the BBC certainly knew beyond question, they knew beyond question that Bashir was a serial liar. Now, so what they're saying to Diana's brother, look, you say X, but our guy, Martin Bashir, says Y, and we're going to go with Y, even though we know he's a serial liar. Now, at that point, Charles Spencer he'd had enough. He decided to get his notes and his, documents, etc., that he kept for 25 years, and he went to the Daily Mail. And the Daily Mail ran 5 front page splashes, one after the other, the scandal, And after 5 days of that, Tim Davie said, okay, right, right, we will, yes, we're going to get on this, we're going to investigate. He was utterly bounced into it by the coverage in the papers. But as I say, that is the important question that he has still to answer. It'll be interesting to see how he does respond to it, because the question is, if he knows at that point in history, he knows that Martin Bashir is a liar, no question, Martin Bashir is a liar, why would you possibly accept his story over this chap Charles Spencer, who there's no reason to suspect that he's lying? Why would he lie? So that is the difficult question that Tim Davie has to answer, and it gets even more complicated for Tim Davie for this reason, that he will, I think, have quickly understood that his position, to Charles Spencer is indefensible, if indeed he does know that Martin Bashir is a confirmed liar, because why would you possibly go with his story if you know that? So for that reason, a question mark was placed over, but maybe Mr. Davie didn't actually know when he told that judge. Maybe he didn't really know that Martin was a liar. Now, documents that I've been able to get hold of, I'm going to say strongly suggest, they certainly prove that the BBC senior lawyer knew that Bashir was a liar. I have a document whereby she says we knew, as it was in September of 2020, that Martin Bashir had lied back in the day. The email I've talked about from Davie to Spencer was October of 2020, so it's after they definitely know he's a liar. Yeah. And again, that is one of the difficult questions that Davie today in 2025 has to answer. What did you know, and when did you know it? And if you did know that Bashir was a liar, why did you say that to Charles Spencer? And as I say, it will be very interesting to see how he handles that.
My childhood, I remember sort of Bashir always being about, there's the MJ documentary and he was on TV doing this and that. Was he at Newsnight or continued on Panorama? I don't even know where, but he was just always there. And then he just disappeared completely. And when I've seen him since all this news came out, he always looks very sort of frail. Is he unwell? What's going on with him?
Well, unwell. He currently lives in let's not say the actual town for what it's worth, but it's a very, very pleasant little market town in Hampshire. He's, as I understand it, he's a keen member of his local church. Health, who knows?
He sort of had a walking stick or something, didn't he? I swear I saw him with a walking stick.
The reason I sort of hesitate here is that there is evidence that Martin, if he thinks that it will, be beneficial or somehow to his advantage that people think he's maybe a little iller than he is.
Harvey Weinstein.
Then he might go down that road. But his health became a very, very important issue during the time when
this all came out.
This was coming out, and it became very important. And again, there's a whole chapter on this in the book, because what the BBC did was, and I believe they did it for a very, very clear reason. But I got to say to you, if you like, other versions of the truth are available. The BBC will say, "Oh no! We were forced into what we had to do." Anyway, let's put it this way: the BBC said, "Look, we would love to be able to put out more information on this, but we can't because Martin Bashir's too ill. He's too ill. We can't."
With what?
We can't discuss this with him because Martin's too ill.
Have they disclosed what illness?
Well, no. In fact, Martin Bashir did actually go in and have an elective heart operation.
Okay.
So he did have heart surgery, but the point is, the BBC said, look, we just can't approach him. We can't approach him because he's so ill. Now, I was able to get hold of, again through good old freedom of information, a whole raft of emails that show that the BBC were actually in virtually daily contact with Martin at great length. They were daily contact. I mean, they were discussing the scandal and points of the scandal and who did what and why and when. At one point, there's one, and it is in the book, I think it is absolutely priceless. It is an email to Martin Bashir, who, again, the official line is that he's too ill, we can't contact him, unfortunately. And this is during, important to say, this is during lockdown, so people aren't coming into the office anyway, everybody's at home. So the BBC position is, look, terribly sorry, people, we just can't talk to him because he's too ill. Anyway, this email that is in the book shows that he was actually the point man with him at the BBC. They were communicating virtually every day. And the subject under discussion in this email is, look, Martin, we're just renewing our press release on how we can't contact you. And so there's a discussion. And what's sort of Alice in Wonderland about this, or through the looking glass about this, is the discussion was about how they couldn't discuss it. That was the advice they were getting from Martin. Is, what should we say? Look, we said we can't contact you because you're too ill. What should we say? Oh, yeah, we say this, we'll say that. And I'm thinking, hang on, but
that is a discussion. Yeah, it's Orwellian.
It's Orwellian.
Double speak.
And what's more Orwellian, if you like, is that discussion was with a chap called Richard Burgess, who was a senior executive at the BBC. Richard Burgess actually runs, and again, you couldn't make this up. He actually runs the BBC unit called BBC Verify.
Oh, don't stop!
Which is the super squeaky clean Truth Is Us.
Yeah,
he runs this. He runs BBC Verify, and he's the chap in my book who we see his emails, his daily emails with Martin Bashir, who at that time in the BBC official description is too ill to be contacted. So that's the BBC.
That makes me so angry. That BBC Verify, the amount of stuff that they get wrong time and time again. That we're going to fact check this, and they tell you their version of it, and then they've doctored the Trump footage, or they've done where was BBC Verify then?
Well, sure. I mean, there's a lot of this story that I would, the sort of devil on my shoulder says, hey, wouldn't it be fun if you just put this to BBC Verify and said, could you just check whether Martin Bashir was ill? Because there seems to be an email here from your boss that indicates he wasn't. BBC Verify, get onto that,
Is there going to, have you got like a film right? I mean, I can't remember how it all works with, you get the rights to your book, because that should be a dramatized film.
Well, I have been, I got to say, been approached by several people to do exactly that, to sort of turn this into your... Who'd play me?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's got to be between, there's Pierce Brosnan and there's, I mean...
There's that Scottish guy who was just on The Traitors, Mark someone. He could probably do you.
Not Alan Carr, no.
Mark, not Alan Carr.
No. That was a joke. Mark thingy. But who knows? But no, I think it... Yeah, for sure. I mean, some people have said to me, it's a bit like Mr. Bates and the Post Office, because there's me... Because one thing we haven't even talked about yet is the getting of these freedom of information documents. My latter freedom of information request then resulted in a 3-year court battle on which the BBC spent, just in external lawyers, fancy lawyers. They hired a KC, the top grade of lawyer, etc., etc. The BBC has spent more than £1 million of licence fee money to effectively to stop this book being written. To stop these emails emerging.
So I know why you work with Andrew Loney then. The two of you are always, being told not to publish this, don't publish that, and you still do. I have so much respect for that. I appreciate it. I mean, we all appreciate that, because this story wouldn't be being told otherwise. Yeah. Bloody hell. Is what Bashir did then? I mean, it's fraud, right? Isn't it? Could he go to prison?
Well, it's a very, very good question, and I talked to specialist barristers specialising in forgery here, forgery. Yeah, I mean forgery is a clearly defined criminal offence. You do 10 years. You can
10
do 10
years?
years. Yeah, 10 years. There is no time bar as well. So if you did your forgery back in 95, 96, that works. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Tell me about it. It does seem to be that you can quite freely go and have a couple of bank statements created, fakes, and use them, and get yourself a very, very valuable commodity, which is the world's most sought-after interview, and these help you to get it. It seems that that's okay. So who knows? Maybe that's something we should try, because nobody's going to come and bang you up, lock you up for doing it.
It's such a hard thing, isn't it? Because there's that part of me that's just going, he should see prison time or something for that. I don't like the idea of people going to prison for non-violent acts. At the same time, this is something that in some way led to, the end of Diana's, her days. And so he should be punished in some way for this. And it seems like it's come out so late at the end of his career, really, that it's not, we didn't get him at the right time.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, in some respects, one could say that Bashir has been punished to a degree. I mean, his reputation is utterly shredded. He'll never work again in broadcasting, etc. The people who have not been punished in any respect, are the BBC managers who could have stopped what I describe as the sort of the runaway train that Bashir had set off racing down the tracks. They could, and I argue should have stepped in and stopped it, and they've not been punished at all. Not at all. I said to the BBC, look, the BBC has had to pay out something like £1.2 million in reparations to various people. The inquiry that was held was another million. So there's millions of pounds been spent. So I said to the BBC, look, with all this millions of pounds, and like I say, £1 million on stopping me seeing emails, with all this money and the awfulness that went on, has a single note of censure, a single word or note of censure been addressed to any of the managers at the time who were responsible for this, or indeed have their very, very hefty pensions been affected in any way with all these millions of quid going out the door? The answer is no. Not a single word of reprobation. In fact, Bashir himself was not fired for anything that he did. He was, the BBC said that he decided to concentrate on his health. So he left.
It's always too late when we get these people, or almost always, yeah. I was going to name some people and I thought it's irrelevant. But okay, I got one more question for you. But tell me, I mean, this book, it's hopefully coming out around the same day this will come out, within the same week. We'll try and organise that to happen. And it's going to go into way more detail about everything you've discussed today. It's a brilliant book, and it's also, the agent was Andrew Loney, wasn't it? And he's a beloved regular interviewee on this channel, so you'd be supporting Andrew Loney, people, if you get this book as well, and as well as Andy. Where can people get it? The usual places and all of that.
Yeah, all good bookshops, and maybe even not so good bookshops. Hopefully, yeah, certainly Waterstones. I'm glad to say that they placed a big order for the book. So Waterstones and wherever your local, yeah.
It's going to smash it, that book. That's going to smash it. Dianarama, The Betrayal of Princess Diana. That's going to do really well. Tell me who's a heretic you admire.
Well, I'm going to say you've just mentioned him, so why don't I? It's not just because he's my agent, but Andrew Loney, who people may, he's talked to you a couple of times, I think. Andrew Loney, he wrote the really great book on I almost said Prince Andrew. How does one not? But anyway, Mr. What is it? Where are you called? Mr. Andrew.
What's his name now?
Yeah,
Andrew someone.
Mountbatten,
Windsor,
Mountbatten, Windsor, or whatever. But I'm going to say Andrew because he has he's faced monumental struggles to get hold of things under FOI. I think I'm right in saying he spent more than 200 grand in hiring lawyers, etc., etc. That's something I haven't been able to do. It was me at the kitchen table, but nonetheless, Andrew did great work there. So let me make him my nominated heretic.
Yeah. What a heretic that is. I think people will really like that. He's very popular on this channel, as will you be. People, please go and get Dianarama, The Betrayal of Princess Diana. It's out in shops and everything now. We'll put a link down below. This is gonna take the world by storm, so get ahead of it and get hold of that book. Andy's been great coming in here, so please do that. Comment all down below and share the hell out of this video, because more people need to know about it, and the BBC is an absolute mess and people need to know that. Hit the like button and keep watching this show.